Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 1529 of the series. We will continue of an apocalyptic tone recently adopted in philosophy by Jacques Derrida. And we deep dived into this text, one could say, and we've been turning it, and there are many interesting dichotomies playing around here. Inner, outer, higher, lower. Original copy. And of course, for Kant, the most important, ratio and pathos. The so-called mystagogues, scanty philosophers that Kant attacks, are defenders of mysticism. They are obscuring the truth, making it less telling, less clear, less forceful. And force is also something we mentioned. You can put force in comparison with, sorry, I need to put some more light to us here. You can compare force to the detone principle. When the strings are no longer vibrating, they get slack. They do not take in any disturbances, and they are therefore detoned. For Kant, that was a way of communicating directly to everyone. The detoned language had that capacity. One way of viewing that is to say that the detoned language lacks the subjective part, or has less of it. The disturbance of the inner, or the mystical. And the more one reads the text, the more one begins to wonder, who is the one that is advocating an apocalypse, an eschatological philosophy? Is it the mystagogues, or is it Kant? Kant seems to be wanting to understand everything with his specific movement. It is like the subject seeing itself, becoming so transparent. So all obscurities of the glass is cleared away. No more obscurities. Kant often uses this very phrase, and I think that's pertinent to obscure, or even calling them for the, in German, Obskuranten, the obscurer. In a way, he wants to finish off with philosophy, making the total philosophy that understand even its own understanding principle. A priori, a posteriori, analytical truth and synthetic truth. What he constructs in the end is actually a square. In this square, everything gets covered. Nothing is outside of it. We have a priori, before Kant, so to speak, or talking about everything that will be in the future. A posteriori, everything that will happen. Analytical, they were true even from the onset of Kant. And synthetic, whose truth will be uncovered. This is a square in the understanding of Kant that takes in everything and sort of make it still. Temporality disappears. Everything is already always covered in the square. Nothing new can come to the forth. So in a way, history, philosophy, ends here with Kant. He himself gets eradicated in the process. He's just a shower, having no subjective tendencies. Purity itself. This could be the height of enlightenment. It is very hard to imagine taking this any further. We've come to the end of philosophy. He most definitely seals the box, never to be possible to open once more. Total understanding in one square. How utterly convenient. So it could be that it is actually Kant who has the apocalyptic tone, or has an apocalyptic philosophy from the point of knowing temporality and space. I will continue to read a little bit from the text. I think I'm currently at page 23. Just in the beginning, and for safety I will begin with the first what on the fourth line. And we've been speaking earlier about the ends. The ends, to come to what ends? Those who declare the end of this or that, of man or the subject, of consciousness, of history, of the West, or of literature. And according to the latest news of progress itself, the idea of which has never been in such bad health to the right and the left. What effect do these noble Gentile prophets or eloquent visionaries want to produce? It almost sounds like he's talking about himself. In view of what immediate or adjourned benefit? What do they do? What do we do in saying this? To seduce or subjugate whom? Intimidate or make whom come? These effects and these benefits can be related to an individual or collective, conscious or unconscious speculation. They can be analyzed in terms of libidinal or political mastery, with all the differential relays and thus all the economic paradoxes that overdetermine the idea of power or mastery, and sometimes drag them into the abyss. Lucid analysis of these interests or of these calculi should mobilize a very great number and a great diversity of interpretive devices available today. it must and can do this, for our epoch would be rather super-armed in this regard, and a deconstruction, if it does not stop there, nonetheless never goes without some secondary work on the system that joins this super armament to itself, that articulates, as is said, psychoanalysis to Marxism or to some Nietzscheanism. To the resources of linguistics, rhetoric, or pragmatics, to the theory of speech acts, to Heideggerian thought on the history of metaphysics, the essence of science or of technology. I think more or less all of these subjects we covered in the long series. Such a demystification must give in to the finest diversity of apocalyptic ruses. The interest or the calculus of these ruses can be so dissembled under the desire for light, well hidden under the avowed desire for revelation. And one dissembling can hide another. The most serious thing, for then it is endless. The most fascinating thing depends on this. The subject of eschatological discourse can have an interest in foregoing its own interest. It can forego everything in order to place yet its death on your shoulders and to make you inherent in advance its corpse. That is the soul, hoping thus to arrive at its end through the end, to seduce you on the spot by promising you to guard your guard in his absence. And it's a seduction here, I do admit you can fall for it. We mention in this lovely book the biography of Derrida of the matrix. It is seductive, the matrix. It seems so easy. All of a sudden you get all this final knowledge about everything. It puts you next to God almost. or I would say, speaking about Freud, above God. I think Freud is a good example here to give some flesh to this. Freud understood why we believed in God and why he did it. It's a complete understanding, very close to this Kantian omnipotent or omniscient, omniscientific you could call it, knowing everything, even the reason for God's thinking. No wonder Freud is so seductive with his psychoanalysis. The promise of understanding everything now, directly, without delay, without too hard a work. I am not sure that there is just one fundamental scene, one great paradigm, according to which, except for some deviations, all the eschatological strategies would regulate themselves. Just put a pause there. I am not sure that there is just one fundamental scene, one great paradigm, according to which, except for some deviations, all the eschatological strategies would regulate themselves. It would still be a be a philosophical onto eschatological interpretation to say the apocalyptic strategy is fundamentally one. Its diversity is only a diversity of procedures, masks, appearances, or simulacra. Oh, I put in parentheses, matrices, grids. This caution being taken, let us yield for a short time to the temptation of a fiction, and let us imagine this fundamental scene. Let us imagine that there is one apocalyptic tone, a unity of the apocalyptic tone, and that the apocalyptic tone is not the effect of a generalized derailment, of a Verstimmung, multiplying their voices and making the tones shift, opening each word to the haunting memory of the other in an unmasterable polytonality, with grafts, intrusions, interferences. So here we have the noise, here we have the disturbances, the turbulence, all these new things not covered in the square. Generalized Verstimmung is the possibility for the other tone, or the tone of another. To come at no matter what moment to interrupt a familiar music. The disturbance. I'll read the parenthesis. Just as I suppose this is readily produced in analysis, but also elsewhere, when suddenly a tone come from one knows not where cuts short, if that can be said. The tone that tranquilly seemed to determine the voice and thus ensure the unity of destination, the self-identity of some addressee or sender. Here we recognize autobiography, the voice of a friend. Henceforth, Verstimmung, if that is what we call the derailment, the sudden change of tone, as one would say, la sautée d'humeur, the sudden change of mood, is the disorder or the delirium of destination. But also the possibility of all emission. The unity of the tone, and I think this next one is very important. The unity of the tone, if there was any, or I would say if there were any, would certainly be the assurance of destination. But also death, another apocalypse. So let us imagine that there is one apocalyptic tone and one fundamental scene. Then whoever takes on the apocalyptic tone comes to tell you, or itself something, but what? I say whosoever takes, in order not to say he who or she who, those men who, or those women who. And I do indeed say the tone, which one must be able to distinguish from all articulate, discursive content. What a tone means is not to perforce what the discourse says, and either one can always contradict, deny, make drift or derail the other. This whole paragraph is very pertinent, and remember the voice of the friend. Determining it makes it less. It rids it of its force. One could even say that it's a way of you who's listening to detone the voice of the friend. Make it general. Universalize it. Becomes less stronger. And this is what I meant earlier when I said force is read in the text. Force is very important. The detonement, or as we also played with, denoting, they are deeply connected. And of course, in the square bracket or the square of the Kantian and total apocalyptic understanding, there is no space for derailment, surprise, tone, personality, or the sudden change of mood, la sautée d'humeur. Whoever, and I continue, whoever takes on the apocalyptic tone comes to signify too, if not tell you something, what the truth, of course, and to signify to you that it reveals the truth to you. The tone is the revelatory of some unveiling in process. Unveiling or truth, apophantics of the imminence of the end, of whatever comes down, finally, to the end of the world. Not only truth as the revealed truth of a secret on the end, or of the secret of the end. Truth itself is the end, the destination, and that truth unveils itself is the advent of the end. Truth is the end and the instance of the last judgment. The structure of truth here would be apocalyptic. And that is why there would not be any truth of the apocalypse that is not the truth of the truth. Then, whoever takes on the apocalyptic tone will be asked, with a view to what and to what ends, in order to lead where, right now or soon. The end is beginning signifies the apocalyptic tone. Let me repeat that. The end is beginning signifies the apocalyptic tone. But to what ends does the tone signify this? The apocalyptic tone naturally wants to attract, to get, to come, to arrive at this, to seduce in order to lead to this. In other words, to the place where the first vibration of the tone is heard. Which is called, as will be one's want, subject, person, sex, desire. The end is soon, it is imminent, signifies the tone. I see it, I know it. I tell you, now you know, come. We are all going to die. We are going to disappear. And this death sentence cannot fail to judge us. We're going to die, you and me and the others too. The Goyim, the Gentiles, and all the others, all those who do not share the secret with us. But they do not know it. It is as if they are already dead. We're the only ones in the world. I am the only able to reveal to you the truth or the destination. I tell you it. I give it to you. Come, let us be for a moment, we who do not yet know who we are. Let us be for a moment. Before the end, the soul survivors, the only ones to stay awake, it'll be stronger for it, will be a sect, will form a species, a sex or gender, a race, all by ourselves. We give ourselves a name. The discourse, or rather this tone, I translate into discourse. This tone of the vigil at the moment of the end, which is also that of the funeral watch, of the wake it always cites or echoes in a certain way John's Apocalypse, or at least the fundamental scene that already programs the joining writing. Thus, for example, and here's the site of the Bible, I know your works. You are renowned for living, but you are dead. Stay awake, strengthen what remains, so near dying. If you do not stay awake, I shall come like a thief. You will not know what hour I shall come upon you. End of quote. And will this parallel this from Paul Livingston? It was very massive, concentrated text here, so it takes some time to take it apart, expand it to a more readable format. And I will parallel it with Wittgenstein Mathematics and the Temporality of Technique by Paul M. Livingston. This is page 13. And we have used this text earlier on, and it's a bit down on the first paragraph beginning with if. There.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the infinite series, and you can very well compare the infinite series of mathematical numbers with the whole history of mankind, which is sort of captured in this apocalyptic tone. Where it's completely understood, already from the beginning, without effort, without time lapse. It reminds me of the god of Maybach Xenophanes, who's quicker than his own thought, ridden by personality, or sterilized from all personality or any personality traits. A sort of chlorinated god. I'll read here from If, page 13. If the infinite series of values determinable, this is important, by means of a mathematical technique is not just available to be read off from Platonic heaven or the repetition of a mechanical procedure either. Rather, if the teaching and learnings of technique is irreducible in the way Wittgenstein suggests, What matters most is to preserve this irreducibility, to maintain it as an intrinsic and unavoidable part of the relationship between teacher and student involved in the practice of learning mathematics. And to understand the pedagogical experience as, and this is important, as irreducible part of the bearing of mathematics on the diverse circumstances of the individual and the collective lives we lead, which is to say, as irreducibly part of mathematics itself. So it's not enough with a mathematical, technical, mechanical procedure, and it cannot be taken off from the Platonic heaven as Kant wanted to do. Matrix. It's not mechanical, it is not taken from the Platonic heaven. Stay clear of the Scylla and Charybdis. He points to the relationship and the work and the time between teacher and student. Of master and disciple, of God, I would say, and man. Where we learn from God, He teaches us, whereas Kant understand, so to speak, what God thinks. Continue. Drawing on Wittgenstein's remarks, I have argued for a conception of mathematical technique, according to which it is both, on the one hand, situated in the complex context of human forms of life, and on the other, nevertheless, and this is important, fully determinate and objective. I will repeat that on the whiteboard later. This is exactly the argument that Kant made to preserve mathematics as a Platonic given. It can be, and it must be, in the complex web of all human forms, nothing outside of it. That can fully determine it and be objective. Absolutely objective, but not in the limited Kantian way. I have further suggested that such a conception of technique as fully and irreducibly situated within the finitude and temporality of human life, can be seen as an irreducible and essential part of what mathematics itself is, so that it is not really possible to characterize mathematical entities or truths as they are, even in themselves, without reference to the complex dynamic circumstances of human life. There I enter. Just think of the enormity of history, Geschichte, of all the relations, of all quantum events in the universe. They, together with our doing and our relations with our teachers and our inner, is what mathematics is. You cannot make it, so to speak, extremely forehand as Kant had the idea of, and which sort of pushed him going even further into the apocalyptic tone of his own philosophy. Put a pause there and go to the whiteboard. So welcome to the summary of 1529 so far, and I will just recite some interesting things in the text by Derrida. The unity of the tone, this is on page 24, if there was any, would certainly be the assurance of destination, but also death, another apocalypse. And it's the unity that is important. Whoever takes on the apocalyptic tone, we can read a little bit further down in the next paragraph, comes to signify too, if not tell you something. What? The truth, of course. And to signify to you that it reveals the truth to you. The tone is the revelatory of some unveiling in process. So it's the unity, and I just read here, Wittgenstein is looking into if mathematical truth, and that covers what Kant would say, the world, the heavens and the skies and below, everything, that cannot be summoned up from a Platonic realm. Brought down to the life where we are and understood by us. This is what Kant is claiming, I would say, bringing everything into his square. All of the past, all of the future, everywhere, and to be knowable in an instant. This reminds me about the fictitious, probably, dialogue between Niels Bohr and Einstein. And in this fictitious dialogue, Einstein is saying, God does not play dice. Why does he say that? Because he knows the intentions of God. Bohr finds him out and say, who are you to know what God does or wants? It is incredibly important. Bohr is, of course, well understood in what Derrida and Wittgenstein is pointing to. The complete interconnectedness of all doings, works, history, and as was mentioned here, the relation between teacher and student and the time it takes to learn it. All those facets, the little drip of sweat on the forehead, the breath of fresh air from the outside, the smell of the classroom, the outsideness, the future. All these are included in what is mathematics. Kant thinks not. For him, it is nowhere in this world, and actually, oddly enough, not in the transcendental world either. It is just present. That's why it's so elegant to compare infinite number series with the whole of history and the world. We cannot take it in at one singular point, one origo. We earlier called this the panopticon, which leads to another problem of the little figure in the head, homunculus. And this misunderstanding, so to speak, is the Wittgensteinian term. I would say it's an attitude, a Verstimmung, a way of standing, a mood. That will make oneself misunderstand oneself for a Xenophanian god. Thinking that I have access to the whole of things in this Platonic fashion or Kantian apocalyptic finishing off of all of knowledge. Ending in one singular point. And I would say, and this is my own take, this is nullification, this is eradication of everything. There is, of course, blasphemous tendencies in this. Man puts himself above God. This has often been pointed out, but not in what fashion we do that. That is done here, in the Derridian text. And Wittgenstein clearly shows it is a fundamental error that eradicates and takes away knowledge, making all understanding blind to itself. And the promises are chagrins, illusions, so to speak. The true world is more complex than that. There is gazillions of connections in the universe, in this room. Smells, atoms, quantum effects, all oral history, why I have a mark here because I burnt myself when I was 8 by accident, and so forth. The hand that is so important in learning mathematics. So I think for two reasons I bring in mathematics here. It is obviously decisive in which turn Kant takes. He mentions the shopkeeper, as we had earlier on. I think it was page 12 or 11. It is so obvious to Kant. He doesn't even give an extra argument that, of course, the shopkeeper cannot use poetry. He needs to use mathematics in his shopkeeping book when he does his receipts, his calculations. Otherwise, there would be no control. He wouldn't know. It would be disastrous. Not understanding mathematics and science, maybe in the same camp, pushes you into this direction irrevocably, and you find yourself in a place you don't want to be, I imagine. A place that you get so inflated by the knowledge you think you have, so you places you above everyone. And of course that God becomes the deistic God of Newton, very small God. And he also understands what God does in a way. He does change the planetary curves to make the universe go smoothly. That's Newton saying. It's absurd. Carl, you have a comment here?
Okay, yes. I go to page 24.
Give us a sec. Wait until the camera is on. Let me grab my copies.
Page 24. Truth itself is the end, the destination, and the truth unveils itself is the advent of the end. Sometimes often Derrida uses irony, so it's not easy to see where is he serious or where he is only reassuming Kant's point of view.
Yes.
So let's think about, is he Derrida serious here, or he only summarizing Kant's point, or is he speaking what Derrida himself thinks? Truth itself is the end, the destination, and the truth unveils itself is the advent of the end. I think Derrida is both serious and non-serious in this phrase. I could compare it from the religious Jehovah's Witnesses. When one Jehovah's Witness meets another Jehovah's Witness, he doesn't ask this person, when did you become a Jehovah's Witness? Itself he asks, when did you know the truth? The truth. Like a little bit in Orwell's 1984 novel, you speak there about the truth. This sentence, truth is itself is instead a destination. And there is something there, that truth is a destination. But on the other hand, there is really no destination, or there is no destination, because we have many times pointed out that life is like a vortex. So where would the destination be? Now, let me go to page 35, the next page. There Derrida quotes from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. I know your works, you are renowned for living, but you are dead. So this is the angel, or Jesus, addressing the city of Sardes. Sardes was the capital of the Lydian kingdom in modern-day Turkey. And they were rich. And this wealth, material wealth, had probably made this Sardis, this congregation, self-satisfied. They were not longer eager for Christ. They had money, so they didn't need Christ, so to say. So that's the reason for Jesus blaming this congregation. You are dead. What is Derrida's point here? It depends on the tone. You could say this, of course, with a neutral tone that can't lose, like, I know your works. But what would the neutral tone be here? You're renowned for living. If you put passion, so that is more like Kant would blame. He would say that something wrong with passion here. So there is contradiction terms from Kant's point of view. But I think Derrida will later explain his point with his quotation. But this phrase itself is a tone. I know your works, you renowned for living, but you are dead. I give it back to you. Let us
Hold it carefully.
Yes.
Why indeed, yes. Especially in Derrida's use of the mystagogues, you hear them often in the text. And you think those are the one accused by Kant of the mystagogues. But at the same time, Derrida is saying also, ironically as you say, Kalle, sarcastically, true mystagogue is Kant also. Taking down truth from the Platonic realm is a sort of mysticism. Embedded in the veiled Isis is the core of this hidden mysticism, not out in the open. I'd say that Derridian move is important because he's playing on seriousness and sarcasm at the same time, thereby playing two musical instruments simultaneously. And that also, in a way, applies to Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, put him too simply, it could seem like, I think, von Wright, the Nordic philosopher, took him to replacing the old idea of mathematics or knowledge of the world with being in the world or participating in the world. No, it's also loosening up one's Stimmung, one's mood a bit, by adding good humor. It's double-sided, it's polytonal, as we just read, many tones. It's more an effect of having more tones than a new singular tone. It's a widening of understanding. That's also a relief for ourselves. We can understand Kant, go into him, and not be like sort of narrowed down. Because this is, oddly enough, although that it looks on the surface like taking in everything, making everything known, the apocalyptic tone, so to speak. Finally, we know everything. Oddly enough, and sarcastically or ironically enough, it is a narrowing also, making you understand less. How can I put this? But think about what we mentioned earlier from Stephen M. Rosen. The interpenetration of the subject is leading to the thing contained. The uncontained part needs to be uncontained. Trying to contain it in advance makes the touching not happening. It becomes stillborn, like Xenophon in God, I would say. What looks like a powerful God is an impoverished God. A God that doesn't have the understanding, because you have already limited him, just as in the debate between Bohr and Einstein. So we take a pause and I'll continue a bit with the text. That was a tough text, and we're doing our best to come to grips with it, as using the phrase of my co-author Kalle. It is tough, it is slippery. Sometimes he almost defy understanding. It's almost like he wants us to stop a second and make a pause and to broaden understanding. But I'd say at times it becomes a little overbearing, it's tough. But do be patient with it, it will open up like a big cauliflower. As I see how Derrida works. He works within the text, not from an outside point of it. It's almost like he invites us to interpenetrate into the text or what he's saying more actively, not wanting to confuse us, but an invitation to get us engaged in the understanding. Not to have direct interpretations or ways of interpreting that are fixed. And the other one here I will repeat. That drawing the third paragraph here on page 13, beginning with the subtitle 3. Drawing on Wittgenstein's remarks, I have argued for a conception of mathematical technique, according to which it is both, on the one hand, situated in the complex context of human forms of life, and on the other, nevertheless, fully determinate and objective. These two things are not one truth in ordinary parlance. It's almost like one is ironical or defies the other one. It did so in the case of Kant, no doubt. He didn't think it was possible, and I think most of us don't, but it is still possible. Doesn't follow the law of the excluded middle, if you want to simplify it that much. I continue after objective. I have further suggested that such a conception of technique as fully and irreducibly situated within the finitude and temporality of a human life can be seen as an irreducible and essential part of what the mathematic itself is, so that it is not really possible to characterize mathematical entities or truths as they are even in themselves. Without reference to the complex and dynamic circumstances of human life. Every thought, every flapping of a butterfly's wings. All these things goes into it. This conception can itself seem mysterious, however, given typical and long-standing assumptions about the temporality, listen, temporality of mathematics. However, given typical and long-standing assumption about the temporality of mathematics, assumptions that characterize mathematical facts or truths as outside of time, and thus immune to the possibility of change or transformation, or I would add conversion, irony, as Kalle mentioned. All those things are possible. As thus outside time and change, but nevertheless available. Excuse me, I'm very sorry for that annoying machine. As thus outside time, and I would say outside space as well, and change, but nevertheless available in a unitary and objective way to us. And this unitary is important because Derrida spoke of the unity of the tone. And that, I'm quite sure, is not a coincidence. You find the unity of the tone a bit down on page 24. And then underline, as I did, it will signify, whoever takes on the apocalyptic tone comes to signify to it. Signify to. It will tell the truth. Here, I think Derrida is not completely sarcastic. It's actually pointing to something. I'll repeat that. As thus outside time and change, but nevertheless available in a unitary and objective way to us. These facts or truths are also, on this traditional conception, in some sense outside, and this is important, the empirical world of facts and experience. There is an outsideness. Now we can say that. Livingston is a bit sarcastic, but it is an outsideness. They stand beyond or before the totality of such facts and are wholly isolated from the contingencies they involve. And this is so great. These assumptions already make it mysterious how an entity situated within time, such as ourselves, can so much as have any kind of access to them. And even granting some such access. This is the veiled Isis. This is the mystery, so to speak, that Kant wants to get rid of. Because in his logic or mode, it's not possible. It simply cannot be done. is truly contradictory, not according to the law exclude the middle or any law of logic. I had an example of temporality on the way down here, and I was thinking of a semaphore, a traffic post, where the different signs of the semaphore, red, yellow, green, actually contradict each other. Why is that? Well, temporality is there. It is not constantly red. And as long as you let temporality sneak in, the square becomes problematic for Kant. It becomes insubstantial or unbalanced. This was a mystery to me also. I think it's a mystery to all of us. There is a mysterious thing here that defies ordinary understanding. It's not easy to understand. How is it possible? We are situated in temporality. We have, so to speak, very little access, but still we have this access. And this is, of course, why Kant went the way he did. And I have to be honest, with the hand on my heart, I would go the same way, at least earlier on. Which makes this even more interesting. I just have to reread. These assumptions already make it mysterious how an entity like myself or my knowledge, situated within time, can have any kind of access to them, and even granting some such access. They pose a problem of the temporal form of mathematical understanding itself. How, as we may put it, do we have infinite temporality and at a distinct moment, a sufficient insight into the whole extent of an infinite mathematical structure? As I shall argue in this last section, this question, as Wittgenstein has pursued it, can be seen as marking in an interesting way a set of basic questions about the form of time, as it is given or accessible to human understanding, and as it can be seen as structuring the world as such. This is where Zeit comes in Sein und Zeit. As we have seen in his remarks, in Remarks of the Foundations of Mathematics, and the philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein is concerned to refute a conception of the infinite totality of a mathematical series on which all of its members would be understandable as just there, all at once, as open to simple inspection by a divinity or a divine entity, the Xenophonian God. To this he opposes the idea of a mathematical or calculative technique, a doing of something by means of mathematics. Which essentially constitutes what it is to be able to know the series, and hence plays an essential role in, as we may put it, constituting the series itself. So our understanding is in itself part of the mathematics. And this is exactly what was said from the biography yesterday of difference. It is not a concept. It is not a thing. It is understanding. What is given in and through the technique is not to be seen as consisting simply in any totality of empirical facts about what in fact is calculated or discovered. Wittgenstein says that even if God were omniscient in the sense of knowing all of these facts, up to the end of the world, he could not know the answer to a question, what it is in the decimal expansion, without actually doing the calculation himself. And here I have a comment by myself. A God who won't know all the fact to the end of the world seems like a good thing, like the Xenophonian God of Kant, but it is actually an incredible reduction of God, making him immensely small, diminutive, making him into the Newtonian deistic God. And exactly as Xenophanes, it doesn't really mean anything to say he thinks and then it's done, as Xenophanes did. These remarks, of course, are not directly about time or the temporal form of the world, but their topic is nevertheless evidently very close to the question of the structure of time, and indeed to the question of the possibility of a realist position on it. This relation is marked not only in the intimate historical connections of philosophical thought about the subject matter of mathematics. Since at last Plato, with the idea of the timeless or extratemporal, but more directly and immediately in the context of discussion that clearly shaped many of Wittgenstein's own ideas about mathematics and truth. That of the debate between formalists and intuitionists of the 1920s and early 1930s. But let me mention here, this was the death breath of intuitionism, of being in the world. It used to be the norm, so to speak, but exactly in this time period it was giving yield to Platonic realism in the sense of Hilbert Gödel and those proponents, and also of course in the analytical philosophy, and the Wittgenstein to a great extent of Tractatus. In broader philosophical terms, both of these positions are notable for the particular kind of temporal perspective they involve. On the formalist conception, the specification of a formal system along with its constitutive rules is itself enough to secure access to the entire and infinite realm of what it discusses. And listen now, and this is to be underlined, this specification is in itself atemporal. Lunacy, I'd say. And the rules are themselves to be finitely statable in such a way as to be repeated ad infinitum. Here, whereas the actual application of the rules requires some sort of actual process or agency, the rules in themselves and what they determine are nevertheless essentially extratemporal, independent and fixed with the specification of the formal system as the ideal system that it is. For the intuitionist, by contrast, there is always and irreducibility, a temporal element in our mathematical cognition. We cannot take ourselves to genuinely have or understand a mathematical structure unless we do so by means of a finite and temporal intuition. And the being and existence of mathematical entities and phenomena is itself essentially dependent on the anterior and posterior structure of flowing time. So do remember Xenon's paradox, what sort of problems he ended up in. They are very close to the ones that Kant and we others, I would say, strands in. A limited take on temporality.
Now 1 hour and 40.
Nice. Do Wittgenstein's remarks quoted above about mathematical practice and technique then show him to be a formalist or an intuitionist about mathematics and time? Again, the answer is neither nor. Sounds very Derridian. It's a sort of sarcasm and irony here. But we can see more clearly the temporal implication of what is in fact his position by considering how it might be generalized to provide a broader conception of the way time itself is given to be thought and experienced. As we have seen above, Wittgenstein's purpose in the remark about God and in omniscience is not necessarily to dispute that there is such a thing as the decimal expansion of pi, very important, and it's not to maintain the anti-realist position that there is no fact of the matter about whether the string of sevens appears in the expansion or not. What is disputed in the remarks is rather the misguided impression that realism itself demands that anyone, God included, could have access to the whole of what is produced by the procedure without going through the procedure itself. And I think that's a massive point and calls for a pause. Let me quote here from almost at the very end of page 24. The end is soon, it is imminent. Signifies the tune, I see it, I know it. I tell you, now you know, come. We are all going to die, we are going to disappear. And this death sentence cannot fail to judge us. We are going to die, you and me and others too. The Goyim, the Gentiles, and all the others. All those who don't share this secret with us. But they don't know it as if they are already dead. It is a new kind of temporality, or it's an expanded take on the temporality. And what Derrida here is ironizing about, helping us to understand, using maybe the only possible way, double understanding. He says two contradictory things in one go. That is very important. Somewhat easy it is to depict what the logocentric take is, but even that is very tough. But let me show it this way. The now is where existence is. The future is absent, marginalized. The past is absent, marginalized. In Kant and all those others, past and future are both understood in terms of the present. For being able to capture everything within the square, it needs to be done from the present, glorified, enlightened point. The non-contradictory in temporality and space, placidness of the now. This is also the place of enlightenment. This idea is seductive. It is more fundamental than an idea. So to question it, it is impossible to criticize it. It needs to be expanded. It needs to be bigger. Yes, it's actually literally an expansion of the understanding. Bringing in the antithesis of future and past. I used a semaphore where red, yellow and green are contradictory, and that happens in time. It's irony here. When red is on in the present, it defies green and yellow. You can see the yellow as the now and imagine it's lit, almost like the beautiful radius of the sun of the enlightenment. Therefore, red can only be defined by yellowness, and so green. They become contradictory, and you will crash with other cars if you fixate on that narrow thing. To open up, widen, letting these be present. Kant and others would feel that would make red and green and yellow less. It would be an inflation of the concepts. No. Remember from Heraclitus, singularity speaks through plurality and vice versa. They are enforcing each other. They are making each other stronger. So the humor can be almost like the strongest argument. If you humor something, you will come to maybe a realization quickly and see, aha, both ways could go. It could be a domination of the present, but it could also be a domination of the past and the future. Remember all these different takes of Derrida looking at writing and speech. We're talking about art writing as something that is more fundamental. It's a sort of sarcasm, it's a turning the table as we could broaden the understanding, taking in the contradictions. Because the whole world will contain contradictions if temporality is let into the picture. Temporality brings also space within its lead. And with space you can take in the contradictions as to make the singular voice stronger. It's obvious that Kant has been weakening himself, making him less telling, even those things that he, at his heart, really wants to tell about morality. This could be eased up, softened, and we can see it as yet another vortex. Having sights, yes, that are past and future, having maybe a circumline that is the now. Now you see how they can be contradictory, helping each other by their contradictoriness, not nullify each other. On the other side, strengthen each other. This is very far from the idea of a determined language. This is a strengthening of language. This is a strengthening of our knowing capacity, which gets delimited, minimized by these tendencies. It's a broadening of the understanding. And all of a sudden, we realized, of course, as Emil Gilchrist, to quote him, Kant was a fervious left-brain thinker. But here is something even more fundamental. It's an understanding in ourselves, what tendencies makes us go into that way, to go into the understanding of exclusion for the possibility of understanding anything. We do not need to exclude in that way. We have the vortex taking both sides in, being both sarcastic and truthful at the same time. Maybe a comment from Calvin.
I think the culprit here is ultimately Plato. We have the Platonic word of ideas. In this ideal word of ideas, which sense is privileged in this word of ideas? It is the I. So all these ideal things like the ideal bed, the ideal table, etc., everything can be seen. So the sight of the eye is privileged. Everything else, like say the smell or the voice, here include of course the tone, is excluded, taken away. And that's also the Mr. Kant. He privileges reason, and reason is, he understands it in Platonian way as linked to the I. But Derrida shows that the voice or the tone is important. And you cannot exclude smell, like what would be the ideal food without a smell? So there is a privilege in, so we need also time and so forth, and time is also excluded from this. And give it back to you.
Yeah, very good, Kalle. Comes me to think, that Wittgenstein in the book by Paul Johnston is using touch. He feels that sight is such an infected subject by the Platonic tendency, so he uses touch, and to show that we don't have the same tendency to fall into the trap of thinking it is completely separable, what I see from what is out there. The idea and what I see, my eyes see. It's very good, Kalle. He uses tactility, the touch. And in touching something, you don't have this idea of color or shape. Either you feel it or you don't. It's not that easy to fall into the trap of dividing. So it's also a very, very strong pedagogical tool. It's not divisible in language or Western language, which makes it so easier to fall into that trap of the ratio only. Do I feel it? Yes, I know what it is. You could be wrong still, but what you felt you cannot be wrong with. That is still true. Whereas with the sight it is, treacherous, filled with thinking mistakes, and Platonic, because look at that. It is enlightenment is about seeing the truth. Using your eyes or your inner vision to directly see. Not to hear, not to touch or smell the truth. Very good, Kalle, I think we end there. Was tough chapter, tough part of the article. Derrida is still wow, very good. Thank you very much for your patience and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.